Namaskar. Today we will see how the philosophy of multiple aspects is connected to modern science and society. We start with modern science. In scientific investigations, as we go to finer and finer constituents of matter, it exhibits more and more attributes, their state of behavior changes, so much so that it is difficult to be certain about any inference about the true nature of the reality. It is therefore not possible to comprehend or quantify all these states at once. What is implied here is that now if you examine the smaller constituents of matter at atomic scale, then you find that the matter behaves in a different way. It does not behave like the gross matter, where you have a certainty. You observe a particular object and you see, okay, this is that. But it's not like this at the smaller scale, and there it has a lot of uncertainty in its state, and this uncertainty is not a limitation of instruments or technique of measurement or consciousness of the observer, but it is due to the inherent nature of matter itself, the uncertainty. So at that scale, matter behaves in a very uncertain way, and it has been confirmed, and that it is not because of the limitations of the instrument used in the experiment, or because of some limitation of the experimenter, the observer, but it is due to the inherent nature of matter. The matter behaves in a different way at a small scale. So Anekant is not simply a multiple perception theory or limitation of consciousness, or the consequences of not being able to look at an object from different perspective, but the object cannot be known from all the perspectives. So if there is uncertainty in the behavior of the matter, you cannot observe it very properly, and you cannot arrive at a particular decision. Look here, this is the state of matter. So Anekant is as fundamental as the uncertainty principle, and this is what Anekant principle says, that there are certain conditions, or there are some conditions in which the state is inexpressible. You cannot express its state. This exactly happens in case of matter at a very small scale, which states that some properties cannot be measured accurately, not because of instrumental limitations, but because of inherent behavior of nature. So nature behaves in a particular way like that. And this validates what we have been saying, the Anekant philosophy, that the nature, there are certain states which are not expressible. What happens in physics is that experimental facts about the observed phenomena are correlated, and a mathematical model theory is worked out. Very often the theories had to be modified or sometimes even dropped altogether if the experimental evidence continues to contradict the model theory. So this is the regular procedure in science, or in physics, that experimental facts are verified or correlated with a mathematical theory or a mathematical model, and if there is no agreement or there is a disagreement between the two, the theory has to be dropped, because the experimental observations are correct. So, the realization that all models and theories are approximate is basic to modern science. So, the physicists arrive at a conclusion that look here, the theories are approximate. All theories are approximate. They satisfy the observed state of conditions to some extent, or may not satisfy at all. Then they have to be dropped. They can never explain all the aspects of reality, and will therefore never give a complete description of a real situation. So, limitation of mathematical theories that they cannot explain the reality in total. In words of Einstein, we can know only the relative truth. The absolute truth is known only to universal observer. A very famous statement of Einstein, and he accepts this fact that look here, we know only relative truth. We cannot know the absolute truth, because absolute truth is known to one who is a universal observer or something like omniscient. And therefore, any theory is verifying only the relative truth. Jains take a further important step forward in the all embracing systematic whole physical reality. Unity and multiplicity are equally real. So, the system behaves in a united manner, or the system can behave in a multiple aspect manner, and each is real through the other. So, both are correct, and the multiple aspect theory is also correct. A theory which is something similar to the multiple aspect theory of Jains is systems theory in science. So, we briefly go through this. What is a system theory? A system is defined as an organized purposeful structure regarded as a whole, consisting of interrelated and interdependent elements. There could be components, entities, factors, members, parts. The theory is very general and it applies to all kinds of situations. To maintain their activity and the existence of the system in order to achieve the common purpose, the goal of the system. So, in order that we recognize the goal of the system is broken up into elements, components and so on, but they are all interrelated, they are interdependent. If they were not interrelated, if they were not interdependent, it will not form a system. Then each system is a separate, isolated one, it has no relation with another one, then it doesn't form a system. Systems obey rules which cannot be understood by breaking them into parts and stop functioning or malfunction when an element is removed or altered significantly. The system is such that all of the components are essential ingredients of that system. You can't take away any one of the components or any one of the parts. In that case, then the system will stop functioning as it must do, or it will start malfunctioning. Which means that all components are essential. They have to be present in the system. Together, they provide a coherent and unified way of viewing and interpreting the universe as a meta system of interlinked wholes and of organizing our thoughts about the world. So, it is necessary that all components stay together in a unified way, and we look at in a unified way, and then we try to interpret the whole system or the universe. It is in order to make some observations on the conception of systems and holism as described above. So, we do that. Care must be exercised to interpret the emergent properties of the system. So when we examine a system or when we look at a system, we must be careful to see that we are not trying to interpret the emergent properties. There is a danger in doing that. According to Jainism, the system cannot possess any property that is not the property of its elements. The system cannot have anything new. It will have only those properties or those things which are possessed by the elements, or by the components. So a system made of matter can only possess properties of matter, and it cannot possess properties of any other substance like soul or consciousness. So any system made up of matter cannot have the properties of soul, which is another substance. I think I missed this part. When we talk of systems theory, we also have a concept of holism, which is similar to the systems theory. Holism is the theory which makes the existence of wholes a fundamental feature of the world. It's something like system. It's a whole which is the fundamental entity and not the parts. The whole are not entirely resolvable into parts. In one degree or another, they are wholes which are more than the sum of their parts, and the mechanical putting together of their parts will not produce them on account for their character and behavior. So the same thing is emphasized here as same as the system. This is the holism view, and which also says and stresses that the whole must be taken into account and not the parts or the sum of the parts. And it also says that the whole is more than the sum of their parts. Therefore, you can't separate out the parts, study them individually and put them together and say, okay, I have studied the system, I have studied the whole. No, that's not correct. The so-called parts are in fact not real, but largely abstract analytical distinctions, and do not properly or adequately express what has gone to the making of the thing as a whole. The same thing which we said earlier. So this is about the systems theory. That is, the modern science also come up with an idea or concept which is exactly very similar to the concept of Jain philosophy in the form of Anekantvad, or the philosophy of multiple aspects. So this is very encouraging, that these concepts were existing earlier also, and Jains knew that this is the problem when you examining a whole. Anekant in society, how the Anekant views are helpful in understanding society, in reforming the society, or in improving the society, and so on. This is very interesting. Acharya Mahapragya has done a very good exercise here, and he has come up with certain ideas how the philosophy of Anekant or the philosophy of multiple aspects can help to have a better society. The basic force of change in the society is the viewpoint. And how do you view the society? This is very important. The whole thing rests on your viewpoint. How do you look at the society? And that gives you an idea, what to do in the society to improve it. So the viewpoint is important. A change in viewpoint requires the right perception. So if you have the right perception of the society, then only you can change your viewpoint, and arrive at a point which is better for the society. The biggest obstacle between the change and the right perception is our beliefs. We have a certain set of beliefs, all of us, and these beliefs may be a hindrance to have a right perception of the society. Each individual or organization has its own beliefs, and that makes the difference in perception. A belief is found to be based on self-interest and concerns for personal gain, and as a result of which one disregards the good or gain of the others. This is the main problem or crux of the problem. I mean, our belief systems support a view so that we look at the society in our own interest, and we disregard or forget the interest of others. This is the main problem. Insistence on the respective race, class, caste or sect is rooted in the individual belief. So all our beliefs are biased towards the race or class or caste or whatever it is. And these beliefs are responsible for conflicts, disputes and wars. And because of such beliefs and because of such biased view, we have conflicts, disputes and wars in the society or among the nations. A new man, a new society, a new world cannot be visualized without changing these beliefs. Unless you overcome such beliefs, which are your personal gain oriented, you cannot have a good society. You cannot hope for a good society. With the emergence of right perception, a belief changes into a quest for the truth, and the opposition between conflicting interests disappears. If you have the right perception, if you are not looking for your own interest but for the good of the society, then you have a different kind of view and your beliefs would change and they will result into a better society. There are three important societal principles which Acharya Mahapragya has advocated, and these three principles are relativity, coordination and coexistence. He has given these three important principles for a good society. Relativity. What is relativity? The first principle of Anekanta is relativity. You see only the relative truth. You don't see the absolute truth. So this is the first thing to accept. The principle of class difference and their hostile vested interests need to be examined in the context of relativity. Your views cannot be absolute or abstract. They are relative and you have to accept that. For on the basis of relativity, even antagonist interests can be reconciled. So if you have a relative point of view, you can have a sort of you can reconcile between the differences. And the inevitable result is conflict and violence involving the abandoning of the principal purity of means. So if you have the relative point of view, you have that kind of viewpoint, you overcome many of the problems of the society. Then second principle which he has given is coordination. And coordination, it is the principle of quest for unity between two apparently different characteristics of a substance. So or two different characteristics of a society. So if you have a coordination as a principle, then you look for how to find coordination between two different kinds of societies or two different kinds of groups or views. Characteristics which differ also have some identity. This is very important point. Even if there are two groups, which look different, but even then you probably can find some points which are similar. So although you see apparently difference between two groups or two societies, but even then if you go minutely, go deeper into the structure, you should be able to find some points which have similarity. So try to look at those similar points of view rather than the difference point of view. So the reconciliation can be brought about by recognizing the identity principles. What is the similarity between these two groups or between two ideas, between two perceptions, and then try to find a coordination between these two, and you arrive at a better society. Balance in the universe cannot be established on the basis of the premise I alone exists. This is a very dangerous view, it's a very dangerous premise. I alone exist, and therefore, okay, good for me is good for everybody. This is not correct. We survive only by adhering to the principle that besides me, the others also exist, and we are interrelated. So it's not only me; there are other people, and their interest must also be looked into, because we are all interrelated and we are not isolated people. The third principle is coexistence. The third principle is coexistence, I said. Anything or anybody existent must have its opposite. This is nature. In nature, both things exist simultaneously, which are opposed to each other, but they do exist. The animate and the inanimate are two separate extremes. For example, matter and soul, they are two different kinds of substances, different kinds of entities, but they also combine to form the body of the organism. The life, the life is a combination, as I said, of soul and matter. So the two seemingly opposite looking substances combine. This is nature. This happens in nature. So you must accept that the opposite things can also be can coexist, and they can combine together. So the principle of coexistence is as much practical as it is philosophical. For example, democracy and dictatorship, capitalism and communism are ideologically different political systems, but they are no exception to coexist, but they can coexist. You have a democracy somewhere, you have a dictatorship elsewhere, but the two can coexist. The two can have relations between them. They look for their common interest. This is possible. You or me, and not you and me, is an instance of absolutism by which the problem gets compounded. So the problem gets compounded only when you say that you or me, either you exist or I exist. This is the wrong way of thinking. The right way of thinking is you and me. You also exist and I also do that, and okay, both of us, let us coexist. The holiness of the institution of religion has been destroyed by the view only those who follow my religion have the right to survive, and all the rest should be exploited. This is a wrong view, and this we do find in practice. The one religion believes that, look here, only my religion will survive and other religions will not. This is not the right way of thinking. You should be able to accommodate each other and find respect the principle of coexistence. The main strength of religion, in fact, are non-violence, friendliness, and fraternity. Every religion will talk about these values, non-violence, friendliness, fraternity. But in practice, what happens is something different. The absolutistic view has changed from non-violence into violence. This is what has happened in practice. Friendliness into hostility, and fraternity into animosity. This is what has happened. But what should happen is, you respect non-violence, friendliness, and fraternity. If somebody tries to do this exercise, he will find that these elements are present in his own religion. Every religion advocates for this. But unfortunately, they are being disregarded and kept aside in view of their own personal interest. Coexistence implies tolerance and freedom of thought. So this tolerance is very important. Freedom of thought is important. I must have a freedom of thinking. You have a freedom of thinking. both tolerance and freedom of thought are meaningless if we try to enforce our likes, dislikes, ideas, lifestyles and principles on others. So if you try to impose our views, our likes, dislikes on others, where is the freedom, and where is the question of tolerance, Tolerance means you tolerate each other and you have the freedom amongst both of you. It is only the harmony which forms the basis of coexistence. So there must be harmony. Harmony is a principle of search for unity, but it does not negate the pre-existent diversity. So if you try to find harmony, look for harmony, doesn't mean that the diversity doesn't exist. Diversity exists. It's a nature, It's a characteristic of nature, the diversity. And keeping in view the diversity, try to reach at harmony. This is what is implied here. This is the way we can explain an individual as well as society. Every person has both individual and communal consciousness. Some thinkers give more importance to the individual, while others give greater importance to society. This violates the principle of harmony. You should not be one-sided. You should look to both the aspects. We cannot assess an individual properly without paying attention to his or her personal qualities. So the personal qualities are to be respected, and the individual also is to be respected. Then Acharya Mahapragya has described 5 pillars of social orders. This is also a excellent concept, and the 5 orders, social orders which he mentions is interdependence, sensitivity, fixing a limit to one's possessions, fixing a limit to one's freedom, and development. Interdependence. We must recognize that we are interdependent. There is interdependence of interest of individuals and the interest of the society. So they are correlated, they are interdependent. We are not separate beings. If rules, laws, orders are formulated by integrating both society and the individual, their compliance will be natural and comprehensive. So we must recognize both society and individual and try to find the interdependence between these two and respect it. There are situations in which the individual interests are secondary and social interests are primary, and there are situations in which social interests are secondary and individual interests are primary. This principle of differentiation between what is primary and what is secondary in a given situation is very useful for a wholesome order. It may sometimes happen, look here, sometimes you give priority to individual interests and sometimes you give priority to societal interests. You can use your discretion, we have that power of discretion, and you should be able to decide in the overall interest of the society. Society cannot be built unless difference or distinction is considered secondary and the freedom of the individual suffers unless sameness or oneness is subordinated. What he has said that when the interest of the society suffers and when the interest of the individual suffers, So we must distinguish between these two situations. The principle of Anekant relating to primary versus secondary is extremely useful for a successful organization society. So how do you trade off between the primary interest and the secondary interest? It's a very useful exercise, and you should indulge into it and arrive at the right situation, right decision. Then second pillar he talks about is sensitivity. The issue of freedom and dependence is sensitive and not beyond controversy. So he accepts the sensitivity of these two issues, the freedom and dependence. It cannot be explained on the basis of absolutism. No person having emotional attachment can ever be fully free. So we must try to keep aside our emotional conditions or emotional states when we are discussing the good of the society. There are a number of alternatives like individual freedom, social freedom, constitutional freedom, and they can be explained only relatively. True freedom is relative to dependence. No freedom which is absolutistic or not related to dependence can ever be useful for individuals or for society as a whole. So when you talk of freedom, you should be sensitive to these issues and try to have a relative point of view. Limit to possession is another pillar he is talking of. Absolute freedom to corner wealth and consume it is instrumental in creating economic disparities and environmental pollution. We all know this is happening in the world today, that there are certain societies or certain countries which are trying to corner wealth. They have already done it and they want to consume it in their own way. And this creates disparities in the world, and also creates environmental pollution. Poverty, environmental pollution, conflicts, arms race, wars are all the results of an absolutistic approach. So if you have an absolutistic approach, normally conflicts will be inevitable, the wars will be inevitable. So you have to have relative views. And limits to possession, remember, is very important. Without integrating temporal and spiritual considerations, it is impossible to solve the problem of poverty. There can be a thinking, look here, okay, we are rich because of our own labor, because of our own efforts, and this kind of thinking is there. But then this cannot solve the issue of poverty in the world. If one has to look at the issue of poverty in the world, he has to have a spiritual consideration, So his thinking must change. Spiritual consideration means, you exist, I exist, both exist, and both have a right to live, both have a right to resources and so on. Limit to personal freedom. Similarly, the environmental problem cannot be solved without combining restraint on consumption, nor can conflict be avoided without integrating balancing of patience on organizational efforts. So unless we try to control our patience means our greed, our ego and so on. So those kinds of emotion, they lead to these problems of consumption. Look, I am a big person, and I am an important guy, and therefore I need this, I need that, and all that, and go on accumulating many things which you don't need, you probably hardly use. So, so personal freedom is requires very serious consideration, and environmental problems cannot be solved unless you look at the consumption pattern and you realize that you have right to consume only that which you need and not because of your greed. The urge for manufacturing destructive weapons cannot be got over without developing the mentality of non-aggression and a spiritual viewpoint of individual rights. So otherwise, the nations keep on attacking one another. This unfortunately is happening on one pretext or another. But in order to avoid such a situation, one should be a little spiritual. Look here, what we are doing is not correct, and the right to exist must be regarded, respected. The propensity for war cannot be put to an end without diffusing a humanistic viewpoint. You must have a humanitarian viewpoint, and without controlling egotism and greed. I told you, ego and greed are two main enemies of a person or an individual, then he tries to behave in a very selfish manner. So these two had to be compromised or given up. It is not easy to reconcile the above two contradictions. It is difficult, but one must try. The happy outcome of Anekant is the birth of an individual of an attitude of non-insistence or refraining from insistence. So you should not insist on a particular viewpoint or a particular strategy or a particular approach. A person with the above attitude analyzes an event from multiple angles, as a result of which he develops a viewpoint of reconciling different parts and aspects of the truth. This is important, So this is the philosophy of multiple aspects, There are multiple aspects, and we should be able to recognize and respect this kind of situation. Viewed thus, we can say that Anekant views partial truths in a relativistic and reconciliatory way. Although we know only partial truth, but that also we should be able to view in a relativistic manner and a reconciliatory manner. And the last pillar which he has talked of is development. There are problems like poverty versus affluence, equality versus disparity. These are the problems of development in the world. It is essential to review and investigate them thoroughly from the Anekant point of view. Again, a nation faces a number of major problems relating to language, region, autonomy, casteism, sectarianism. These problems are there in every country, They are defying solutions simply because the viewpoint of those engaged in solving them is not relativistic and reconciliatory. So these problems, which exist almost in all countries, can be solved only by having a relative point of view and have a reconciliation between the conflicting ideas. Inflected egos, imperialistic expansion, market monopoly, etc., are international problems. Exclusive thoughts of national development and ignoring global perspective hinders solution to international problems. So you should not only look at your own national problems, but you should also have the global perspective in mind, and then decide, So don't forget the global perspective. World peace and the aspiration of the people of the present age demand that all prominent people in the family, community, nation, and the world should adopt a non-absolutistic outlook. So all these people who are responsible for the state of affair in their own way must have a relative attitude. They should have education in relativity, reconciliation, coexistence, and freedom. Such education will be the best way of solving problems relating to the world peace. So whether you are solving the problem of the world or your own family or your own community or your own nation, these views are important. So what we have done today is to see in what way the philosophy of multiple aspects correlates or connects with science and society, and we have also gone through the ideas of Acharya Mahapragya, very important ideas to improve the society, keeping in mind this philosophy of multiple aspects. Thank you.